Do you ever feel guilty?" The woman's voice purred, smooth and laced with velvet venom. Luna froze, her knuckles pale as her hand hovered over the heavy brass handle of the Alpha's study door. "Guilty?" David scoffed. The deep, familiar timbre of his voice, the sound that usually brought her comfort, now struck Luna like a physical blow. For what? Luna plays her part perfectly. She smiles for the council, she keeps the pack's alliances secure. But she's cold, Celine. Utterly empty. A delicate, cruel laugh echoed from within the room. "And Baron, my Alpha? Let's not forget Baron. The pack needs a true heir, which she cannot provide," David murmured. In the darkened, silent hallway, Luna pressed a trembling hand against her stomach, the crisp ultrasound paper crinkling softly in her pocket. The silence in the corridor was absolute, deafening in its intensity. The grand oak doors of the Alpha's study, carved with the ancient crests of their pack, stood as a massive, mocking barrier between the life Luna thought she had and the devastating reality waiting just on the other side. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry out. The shock was too profound, too absolute for something as simple as tears. It felt as though all the oxygen had been vacuumed from the opulent, dimly lit hallway, leaving her chest tight and aching. Inside, the clink of heavy crystal against glass broke the quiet. David was pouring his favorite bourbon. She knew the sound. She had bought him those glasses for their 3rd anniversary. "You give her too much credit." Celine's voice drifted through the narrow crack in the door, her tone lazy and arrogant. "She walks around the pack house like a ghost. No fire, no passion. It's a wonder you've managed to endure her for 5 years, David. The elders pity her, you know. They whisper about the Alpha with a broken mate." Luna squeezed her eyes shut, leaning her shoulder against the cool stone wall to keep her legs from giving out. 5 years of unwavering loyalty. 5 years of managing disputes, balancing the pack's fragile economy, and standing by David's side through brutal territorial disputes. She had been his anchor, his strategist, his quiet strength. And this was how he viewed her. A political necessity. A cold, empty ghost. "She has her uses," David replied, his voice devoid of the warmth he reserved for the public eye. It was clinical, detached. "Her family name brought us the Eastern Territories, and she doesn't ask questions. She doesn't demand my time the way you do, my beautiful nuisance." The sound of rustling fabric and a low, throaty giggle turned Luna's blood to ice. She reached into the pocket of her tailored slacks. Her fingers brushed against the folded square of glossy paper. Just 3 hours ago, the human doctor in the city had handed it to her with a warm, beaming smile. A miracle, the doctor had called it. After years of negative tests, of silent tears shed in the shower while David slept soundly, of agonizing fertility treatments she had endured alone to spare his pride. It had finally happened. A heartbeat, a tiny, fluttering promise on a black and white screen. She had rushed back to the pack house, her heart soaring, ready to burst into his study and share the news that would finally make their family whole. Instead, she stood in the shadows, listening to the man she loved dissect her worth with his mistress. "When will you step down from this charade?" Celine murmured, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. "When will you claim me publicly? You know I can give you the strong pups this pack demands." There was a long pause. Luna held her breath. A tiny, foolish, pathetic fraction of her soul, hoping David would defend his mate. Hoping he would draw a line. "Patience, Celine," David finally answered, pressing a kiss to what Luna imagined was her neck, judging by the wet, soft sound of it. We wait until the winter solstice negotiations are finalized. Once the treaties are signed, her political leverage will be obsolete. Then, we will deal with the Luna problem. The Luna problem. The words did not break her. They forged her. The agonizing heartbreak that had gripped her chest only moments ago crystallized into something entirely different. It was a cold, pure, and terrifyingly calm resolve. The woman who had walked up to this door. The devoted, eager to please mate, desperate to give her alpha a child. Died in that dimly lit corridor. She slowly withdrew her hand from the door handle. She didn't let the brass clink. She didn't shift her weight too quickly on the hardwood floor. Luna moved with the silent, predatory grace of a wolf who had just realized she was surrounded by enemies. She looked down at her flat stomach, her hand resting protectively over her womb. David didn't deserve this miracle. He didn't deserve her loyalty, and he certainly would never lay a finger on her child. This pup was the pack's future, the true heir he so desperately wanted. But she would see the world burn before she let him use her baby as another political pawn. Turning her back on the study, Luna walked away into the shadows of the estate. By morning, the Alpha would find his problem permanently solved. The Alpha's suite was a masterclass in suffocating luxury. Vaulted ceilings, dark velvet drapes that blocked out the moon, and a massive 4-poster bed that suddenly looked to Luna like a tomb. She moved through the space methodically, a ghost haunting her own life. There was no frantic tossing of clothes, no dramatic sweeps of the arm-clearing vanity tables. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Survival required precision. She pulled a modest, faded canvas duffel bag from the very back of the walk-in closet. It was the same bag she had brought with her 5 years ago when she first arrived at the pack house. A poetic bookend to a miserable chapter. Luna opened her dresser drawers, bypassing the expensive silks, the designer dresses David had bought to make her look the part of a wealthy alpha's mate at galas. Instead, she packed her oldest, most durable clothes. Thick wool sweaters, sturdy denim, and thermal socks. She packed practical toiletries, moving through the bathroom without once looking into the gilded mirror. She didn't want to see the reflection of the woman who had been a fool for half a decade. From the false bottom of her jewelry box, she retrieved a thick envelope. Inside was a substantial stack of mortal currency, cash she had been quietly siphoning and saving from her own personal allowance over the years. It hadn't been an escape fund, not initially. It was just a habit of independence she had never managed to break. Now, it was her lifeline. She paused at the jewelry. Rows of diamonds, emeralds, and white gold glittered under the soft, ambient light. Gifts of guilt, she realized now. Every time he had spent a weekend patrolling the borders with Celine, he had returned with a necklace. She left them all untouched. Suddenly, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed on the grand staircase outside the suite. Luna's heart slammed against her ribs. She shoved the duffel bag deep under the bed, sliding onto the mattress and pulling the heavy duvet up to her chin just as the brass doorknob turned. She forced her breathing into a slow, rhythmic cadence, mimicking the deep slumber she had perfected on the nights she lay awake, nursing her loneliness. The door clicked shut. David's heavy boots crossed the Persian rug. He didn't bother to be quiet. He always assumed she was a heavy sleeper. She felt the mattress dip as he sat on the edge to untie his boots. The scent of him hit her then. Beneath the natural, woodsy musk of his wolf was the sharp, undeniable floral tang of Celine's expensive French perfume. It was overpowering, clinging to his skin and his clothes. Bile rose in the back of Luna's throat, acrid and hot. But she swallowed it down, keeping her face relaxed. her eyes lightly closed. "Luna," David whispered. It wasn't a whisper of endearment. It was a test. She didn't stir. He grunted softly, satisfied. The rustle of clothing followed as he undressed, tossing his shirt carelessly over a velvet chair. He slid under the covers next to her. The warmth of his body radiating against her back made her skin crawl. He wrapped a heavy arm casually around her waist, pulling her against his chest in a practiced motion of possession, not affection. "Empty," his voice echoed in her mind. The Luna problem. She lay there, trapped beneath the weight of his arm, trapped in the lie of their marriage. Every second felt like an hour. She focused her mind entirely on the tiny, fragile life growing inside her, using it as a shield against the overwhelming urge to scream, to shift into her wolf and tear the throat from the man beside her. She had to be smart. A pregnant female against a fully grown alpha was a death sentence. It took 45 excruciating minutes for David's breathing to even out into the deep, resonant snores of a wolf deep in REM sleep. Slowly, agonizingly, Luna slid out from under his arm. She moved millimeter by millimeter, replacing the weight of her body with a bunched-up pillow. When she finally stood beside the bed, the cold floor against her bare feet grounded her. She reached under the bed and pulled out the duffel bag, slinging it over her shoulder. She turned to look at David one last time. In the pale moonlight, filtering through a crack in the drapes, he looked peaceful, handsome, the man she had loved. With steady, deliberate fingers, Luna slid the heavy platinum wedding band off her left ring finger. She placed it gently on the dark wood of the nightstand. It made a faint, metallic clink. David shifted slightly in his sleep, but didn't wake. Luna turned away, slipped through the bedroom door, and closed it silently behind her. She was no longer a mate. She was a mother. Chapter 3. The Midnight Escape. The pack house at 3 a.m. was a labyrinth of shadows and sleeping predators. Luna knew every creak of the floorboards, every blind spot in the security cameras, and every rotation of the night guard. She had designed the security protocols herself 2 years ago when rogue activity had spiked near the southern border. Her meticulous nature, the very trait David had mocked as boring, was about to be her salvation. She bypassed the grand staircase, opting for the narrow servant stairs that led directly to the commercial kitchens. The air here smelled faintly of bleach and yesterday's roasted meats. She moved swiftly, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the tile. Out the back service door, the night air hit her like a splash of ice water. The sky was overcast, thick, bruised purple clouds rolling in from the mountains. A storm was coming. Perfect, she thought. Heavy rain would wash away her scent, making it impossible for the pack's trackers to follow her trail in the morning. The moon goddess, it seemed, was finally showing her favor. She hugged the shadows of the tall, manicured hedges, making her way toward the detached garages where the pack's lesser-used vehicles were kept. Her old sedan, a relic from her life before David, was parked in the furthest bay. "Luna?" The voice, sharp and young, cut through the darkness like a knife. Luna froze, her grip tightening on the strap of her duffel bag. Slowly, she turned. Stepping out from the shadow of the garage was Liam, a 19-year-old guard fresh out of training. His flashlight was pointed at the ground, a sign of respect. But his posture was alert, tense. "Liam," Luna said, her voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone she used during council meetings. She kept her heart rate steady, refusing to emit the sour scent of fear. "You're off your standard patrol route. The perimeter check isn't scheduled for another 20 minutes. The young wolf shifted uncomfortably, intimidated by her poise. "Yes, Luna. Apologies. I thought I heard a disturbance near the tree line. Just being thorough." He paused, his eyes flicking to the canvas bag on her shoulder. Confusion knitted his brow. "Is everything all right, Luna? Are you going somewhere?" Luna didn't miss a beat. "The Alpha has requested a rare mountain herb from the apothecary in the human town for his mother. You know how her joint pain flares up when the pressure drops before a storm. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd make the drive now to avoid the morning traffic." It was a brilliant, unassailable lie. David's mother was notoriously difficult, and Liam knew better than to question the Alpha's orders regarding her. "At this hour?" Liam asked, though his tone was already softening with acceptance. "Let me wake someone to drive you. It's not safe." "Nonsense, Liam," Luna replied, offering him a tight, polite smile. "I prefer the quiet of the night. Stand down. Keep your eyes on the eastern tree line. The rogues are getting bold with the changing season." "Yes, Luna." Liam bowed his head slightly, stepping back into the shadows. "Safe travels." She didn't let out her breath until she was inside the cold, dusty interior of her sedan. She tossed the bag into the passenger seat and engaged the clutch. The engine turned over with a rough, rattling cough that sounded entirely too loud in the silent night. But it caught. She rolled out of the garage with the headlights off, navigating the winding dirt road by memory and the faint ambient light of the approaching storm. 5 miles down the road, she hit the pack boundary line. There was no physical wall, but every wolf could feel it. A subtle shift in the air, a release of the invisible, heavy energy of the Alpha's territory. As her tires crossed over the cracked asphalt that marked the beginning of human lands, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, smattering against her windshield. Within minutes, the sky broke open. A torrential downpour washed over the car, violently scrubbing the earth clean of her passing. Luna turned on the headlights, the bright beams cutting through the heavy rain. She pressed one hand to her stomach, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window. She was entirely alone, driving into the unknown with nothing but a bag of old clothes and a secret that could start a war. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in months. "Just you and me now, little wolf," she whispered into the empty car. "We're going to be just fine." Chapter 4. The cold light of day. Dawn broke over the human town of Crestwood like a bruised plum. The sky a mixture of deep purples and harsh, steely grays. The torrential rain that had masked Luna's escape had slowed to a persistent, dreary drizzle. She pulled her battered sedan into the gravel parking lot of a faded establishment called the Starlight Motel. The neon sign buzzed ominously. The T and the E burnt out, casting long, fractured shadows across the damp pavement. It was exactly the kind of place a wealthy Alpha's mate would never be caught dead in, which made it the perfect sanctuary. Luna turned off the ignition, the sudden silence in the cabin ringing in her ears. Her hands remained rigidly gripped around the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The adrenaline that had propelled her through the night was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel like lead. She forced herself to breathe, uncurling her fingers one by one. Grabbing her canvas duffel bag, she stepped out into the cold morning air, pulling the collar of her wool sweater tight against the chill. The motel lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke, strong black coffee, and cheap lemon cleaner. A bored-looking human teenager with heavy eyeliner sat behind the plexiglass counter, barely glancing up from her magazine as Luna approached. "I need a room?" Luna said, her voice raspy from hours of silence. Farthest from the highway, please. I'll be paying in cash. The clerk popped a bubble of pink gum, processed the worn bills Luna slid under the glass, and handed over a heavy brass key with the number 12 stamped onto it. There were no questions asked, no IDs requested. In the human world, cash was the ultimate silencer. Room 12 was small, dimly lit, and aggressively ordinary. The bedspread was a faded floral print, and the carpet had seen better decades. But to Luna, as she locked the deadbolt and slid the chain into place, it felt like a fortress. She dropped her bag onto the floor and walked to the small bathroom, gripping the edges of the porcelain sink. She finally looked into the mirror. Her dark hair was wildly tangled, her pale skin devoid of its usual pristine makeup. She looked nothing like the Luna of the Silver Moon Pack. She looked like a survivor, miles away, bathed in the soft, luxurious light of the Packhouse Master Suite. David stirred. His hand swept across the vast expanse of the California king bed, seeking the familiar, quiet warmth of his mate. His fingers met only cold, unwrinkled silk sheets. He frowned, his eyes fluttering open against the morning glare. Luna? His voice was thick with sleep, a low, groggy rumble. He sat up, the heavy duvet pooling at his waist. The suite was immaculately silent. The closet door was slightly ajar, but there was no sound of running water from the master bath. He rubbed his temples, a faint ache lingering from the expensive bourbon he had shared with Celine the night before. Annoyance flared briefly in his chest. Luna was usually sitting at the vanity by this hour, quietly brushing her hair, ready to brief him on the day's diplomatic schedule. Swinging his legs out of bed, his bare feet touched the Persian rug. That was when the faint glint of silver caught the morning sunlight. David paused. There, resting perfectly in the center of the dark mahogany nightstand, was her platinum wedding band. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. The annoyance in his chest morphed instantly into a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline. He snatched the ring from the wood, the metal cool against his palm. Luna never took her ring off. Not when she bathed, not when she gardened, not ever. It was a symbol of her devotion, a symbol of their ironclad alliance. "Guards!" David roared, his alpha command lacing his voice, vibrating the heavy glass of the windows. Within seconds, heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The bedroom door burst open, revealing Liam, the young night shift guard, looking terrified and pale. "Alpha," Liam gasped, bowing his head sharply. "Is there an intruder?" "Where's my mate?" David demanded, stalking toward the boy, the ring clenched tightly in his fist. His wolf was rising, a dark, possessive fury clouding his human judgment. Liam swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the empty bed. She left, Alpha, hours ago, around 3 a.m. David grabbed the boy by the collar of his uniform, lifting him an inch off the floor. "And you let her leave? Without an escort? Are you completely incompetent?" "She said it was your orders, sir." Liam choked out, panic leaking into his scent. "She said you sent her to the human town for apothecary herbs for your mother's joints. She took her old sedan. She said she wanted to beat the storm." David dropped the guard, stepping back as the realization hit him like a physical blow. The herbs, the old car, the storm that had just washed away every possible scent trail for 50 miles. It was a calculated, flawless extraction. She hadn't been kidnapped. She hadn't wandered off. She had abandoned him. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the storm. The coastal human city of Port Haven was a sprawling, chaotic metropolis of steel, glass, and perpetual motion. To a wolf accustomed to the open skies and silent forests of the territory, the sensory overload of the city was deafening. But to Luna, the cacophony of sirens, the choking exhaust of city buses, and the endless sea of nameless faces were the perfect camouflage. She had sold her sedan to a scrap yard on the outskirts of town for a fraction of its worth, knowing the pack's connections at the DMV would eventually flag the license plate. She had traded her tailored slacks for oversized thrift store sweaters and plain denim. She paid for a modest third-floor walk-up apartment 6 months in advance, using an assumed name and a portion of her hidden cash reserves. Luna had become a ghost. She found quiet employment archiving old records in the basement of a sprawling, independent bookstore near the university. The pay was meager, but the human owner, a sweet, elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, paid under the table and never asked probing questions. The dusty basement smelled of decaying paper, binding glue, and old leather, scents heavy enough to mask her natural, faint woodland aura. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the city was enveloped in a thick, rolling fog. Luna was walking back to her apartment from the local grocer, a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. The chill in the air was biting, a sharp reminder that the winter solstice was rapidly approaching. She instinctively pressed a hand to her stomach beneath her heavy coat. At nearly 3 months, the tiny bump was barely noticeable to the human eye. But to her, it was the center of the universe. She turned the corner onto a bustling street lined with artisan cafes and boutique shops. She was calculating her remaining funds in her head, planning how to manage hospital bills under a false identity, when it hit her. Pine needles, damp earth, and the distinct, metallic tang of wolf's blood. Luna froze mid-step, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't turn her head. She didn't change her expression. Through 5 years of training alongside David's military strategists, she had learned to control her physiological responses. She forced her breathing to remain even, keeping her eyes fixed on the pavement ahead. It was Marcus, the Silver Moon Pack's lead tracker. He was close. The scent was incredibly fresh, cutting through the smog of the city like a razor. Luna casually shifted her path, blending into a large group of college students waiting at a crosswalk. She chanced a microscopic glance at the reflection in a bakery window across the street. There he was. Marcus stood near the entrance of a subway station, a rugged, imposing figure in a dark leather jacket, completely out of place among the fashionable humans. His head was tilted slightly, his nostrils flaring subtly as he tested the wind. He was hunting. Panic, icy and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. If Marcus caught her scent, he would have 3 enforcers on her location within the hour. David would not come himself. He was too proud. But he would have her dragged back to the pack house in chains if necessary, not out of love, but out of possession and political necessity. Think, Luna commanded herself. You know how he tracks. You wrote the manual. Marcus tracked by isolating distinct anomalies in the environment. He would be looking for her specific floral scent, the undertones of the pack, or the sudden spike of fear pheromones. The pedestrian light turned green. Luna moved with the crowd, keeping her head down. She needed an overwhelming olfactory distraction. Her eyes scanned the storefronts rapidly. A pharmacy, a shoe store, and then a beacon of hope, an international spice market. She slipped away from the students and ducked into the market. The air inside was a dense, suffocating cloud of turmeric, smoked paprika, crushed garlic, and dried chilies. The sheer volume of the spices burned the inside of her nose, bringing tears to her eyes. It was agonizing for a wolf's sensitive olfactory glands, which meant it would be entirely blinding for Marcus. Luna walked deep into the aisles, hiding behind a massive barrel of cinnamon sticks. She crouched low, clutching her tote bag to her chest, focusing entirely on the rhythmic thrumming of the tiny second heartbeat inside her. "You are safe," she whispered to her unborn child in the sanctuary of her mind. "I will not let them find us." 10 agonizing minutes passed. The shop bell chimed as customers came and went, each sound making Luna flinch. Finally, peering through the gap between the shelves, she saw Marcus walk past the shop's large glass window. He was rubbing the bridge of his nose, looking deeply frustrated, his eyes scanning the fog before he finally turned and walked in the opposite direction. Luna let out a long, shaky breath, sinking against the wooden shelves. She had survived the day. But the hunt was officially on, and David was getting closer. The atmosphere inside the Silver Moon pack house was toxic. What had once been a home of structured diplomacy and calm authority had devolved into a powder keg of tension and poorly concealed anger. David stood at the head of the grand oak conference table in the council chamber, his hands planted firmly on the polished wood. Deep, dark circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes, and the usually immaculate trim of his beard was ragged. It had been nearly 2 months since Luna vanished, and his carefully constructed empire was beginning to show severe, undeniable cracks. "This is unacceptable, Alpha," Elder Thorn rasped, striking his walking stick against the stone floor. The old wolf's eyes were hard, filled with a profound disrespect that he no longer bothered to hide. "The Eastern Territories have formally suspended all trade agreements. Alpha Corbin refuses to sign the Winter Solstice Treaty until he speaks directly with his niece." "Luna is indisposed," David growled, his voice a low, threatening rumble that usually demanded submission. Today, it failed. "Luna is gone, David," Elder Thorn shot back, discarding the formal title entirely. "Do not insult our intelligence. The pack feels the void. The treaties she negotiated are collapsing because she is not here to maintain the delicate balances you never bothered to understand. Your borders are weak, your trade is freezing, and the Eastern wolves are preparing to mobilize if they suspect foul play." The heavy oak doors of the chamber suddenly swung open, interrupting the tense standoff. Celine strolled in, draped in an expensive silk robe that left little to the imagination. She carried a crystal glass of mimosas, a stark contrast to the grim faces of the council. "David, darling," Celine purred, completely oblivious to the murderous glare the elders shot her. "The caterers for the Solstice Gala need the menu approved. You promised you'd look at it." The vein in David's forehead throbbed. He looked from the demanding, pampered woman in the doorway to the furious, hardened faces of his council. For the first time, a sickening wave of clarity washed over him. Celine was beautiful, pliable, and eager to stroke his ego. But she was not a Luna. She was a trinket. Luna had been the steel foundation holding his entire world up, silently absorbing the stress, managing the alliances, and making him look like an infallible king. "Get out, Celine!" David snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Celine blinked, her pout faltering. "Excuse me? I am simply trying to—" "I said get out," David roared, his alpha aura exploding outward, heavy and suffocating. The crystal glass in Celine's hand shattered from the sheer pressure in the room, spilling orange juice and champagne over the expensive rugs. She gasped, taking a terrified step back before turning and fleeing the room. David sank into his heavy leather chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "Send Marcus deeper into the human territories," he muttered to his second-in-command. "Double the search grid. Find her, whatever it takes." Miles away, oblivious to the storm raging in her former home, Luna was stacking boxes of fresh inventory in the back room of the bookstore. At herself, she wore a thick, oversized cardigan, the soft wool comfortably draping over the gentle, undeniably maternal curve of her belly. The fear from her close call with Marcus weeks ago had settled into a quiet, vigilant caution. The bell above the shop's front door chimed cheerfully. "I'll be right out, Mr. Abernathy," Luna called out, wiping dust from her hands onto her jeans as she stepped out from the back room. She froze. Standing in the center of the quiet bookstore was not the elderly owner, nor was it a harmless human customer. It was a man in his late 30s, toweringly tall, dressed in a sharp, tailored wool coat. His silver eyes locked onto hers instantly. Luna's breath hitched. She recognized him immediately. Alpha Kalen of the Northern Pines Pack. He was a fiercely independent alpha, ruling a massive, brutal territory far to the north. Years ago, during a harsh famine, Luna had secretly convinced David to route surplus grain to Kalen's borders, saving hundreds of his people. David had done it for political leverage. Luna had done it because she couldn't stand the thought of starving pups. Kalen didn't move aggressively. He simply stood there, his sharp gaze sweeping over her faded clothes, the quiet humility of her surroundings, and finally, resting deliberately on the slight swell of her stomach. Luna's hand instinctively moved to shield her baby, her eyes pleading silently. If Kalen called David, it was over. Kalen took a slow step forward, stopping just short of the counter. He reached into his coat pocket. Luna braced herself, expecting him to pull out a phone. Instead, he withdrew a small, heavy black card embossed with a silver pine tree. He placed it gently on the counter, sliding it toward her. "Your scent is well hidden by the old books, little wolf," Kalen said, his voice a deep, gravelly whisper that carried no threat, only profound respect. But a life debt is never forgotten by the North. He tapped the card once. "When the silver moon comes looking for what they have lost, call this number. My borders are open to you and your child." Before Luna could speak, before she could even process the magnitude of the lifeline she had just been handed, Alpha Kalen turned and vanished into the foggy city streets, leaving her alone with a new, powerful secret. The first snow of the season began to fall over Port Haven, dusting the grimy city sidewalks in a fragile layer of white. Inside the bookstore, the radiators clanked and hissed, fighting a losing battle against the creeping cold. Luna stood by the frosted front window, a feather duster idle in her hand. She wore a thick wool sweater that gracefully accommodated the undeniable, heavy swell of her 6-month pregnancy. The child was active today. Tiny flutters and kicks rolling across her abdomen, a constant, comforting reminder of why she had sacrificed everything. But the quiet peace of her human sanctuary was fracturing. 3 days ago, the local news had reported a series of unusual animal sightings on the outskirts of the city. To the humans, it was a curiosity. To Luna, it was a blaring siren. The Silver Moon Pack was no longer sending lone trackers. They were deploying enforcers. David's desperation had officially outweighed his need for discretion. Her instincts, honed by years of political survival, screamed that her time in Port Haven was up. Hundreds of miles away, the atmosphere in the Silver Moon Pack House had moved past toxic and into a state of sheer, frigid panic. The grand study, once a place of quiet authority, was strewn with maps, financial reports, and empty glasses. David stood by the fireplace, the flames casting long, haggard shadows across his face. He had lost weight. The aristocratic arrogance that once defined his features had been hollowed out by sleepless nights and the relentless pressure of a collapsing empire. Celine was gone. She had packed her designer bags a month prior, fleeing to a southern pack the moment the elders had officially stripped David of his discretionary funds. She had wanted a king. She had no interest in a man fighting a rebellion. "We have a confirmed ping on the financial grid," Marcus said, stepping into the study. The lead tracker looked exhausted, his boots leaving wet tracks on the Persian rug. "A pharmacy in Port Haven. Someone matching her description purchased prenatal vitamins in cash, but the security camera caught a reflection of her face in the convex mirror near the exit." David's head snapped up, his bloodshot eyes locking onto Marcus. The words prenatal vitamins hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. A ringing started in David's ears. He gripped the edge of the mahogany mantel, the wood groaning under his sudden, crushing grip. "Prenatal. Are you certain?" David whispered, his voice cracking, devoid of its usual alpha command. The memory of the night she left flashed in his mind. The way he had callously discussed her supposed barrenness with Celine just hours before she vanished. A sickening, violent wave of realization crashed over him. She hadn't just left him. She had fled to protect his heir. 80% match alpha. Marcus replied cautiously, taking a step back as David's aura flared, erratic and dangerous. "I have 3 teams positioned around the city limits. If we move now, we can form a perimeter and flush her out by nightfall." "Prepare my vehicle," David ordered, pushing away from the mantel. His chest heaved, a frantic, possessive energy surging through his veins. "I am going myself. No one touches her. No one speaks to her but me." Back in the quiet, dusty aisles of the bookstore, the bell above the door chimed. Luna didn't turn around immediately. She felt the shift in the air before she heard the footsteps. It wasn't the scent of a wolf, but rather the heavy, unmistakable tension of a hunter entering the room. She turned slowly, her hand resting instinctively over her belly. A tall man in a dark trench coat stood by the new releases. He wore human clothes, but his posture was too rigid, his gaze too sharp. He was scanning the room, his eyes lingering on the back corridor. It was one of David's border guards. Luna's breath hitched, but she forced her expression to remain entirely blank. She turned her back to him, casually walking toward the employee break room. Once the door clicked shut behind her, the facade shattered. Her hands trembled violently as she grabbed her canvas tote bag. She had known this day would come. Reaching into the deepest pocket of her bag, her fingers brushed against the heavy, embossed card Alpha Kalen had given her months ago. "When the silver moon comes looking for what they have lost." She pulled her burner phone from her coat pocket. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she punched in the numbers on the black card. The line rang only once. "Northern Pines." A gruff, deep voice answered. "This is Luna," she whispered, her eyes glued to the crack under the break room door, watching for the shadow of the enforcer's boots. "I need to call in a life debt." The extraction was a masterpiece of terrifying efficiency. Within 20 minutes of her phone call, a heavy, armored black SUV with tinted windows had idled in the alleyway behind the bookstore. A woman with icy blue eyes and scars tracking down her jawline had stepped out, ushered Luna inside without a single word, and driven them out of Port Haven before David's perimeter could fully tighten. As they drove north, the sprawling concrete of the human city gave way to dense, ancient forests and towering, snow-capped peaks. The air grew perceptibly thinner, biting and pure. Luna sat in the back seat, watching the frost pattern the windows, her exhaustion finally dragging her into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she awoke, the vehicle had stopped. Luna stepped out into a world of blinding white and deep forest green. The Northern Pines packhouse was not a sprawling, ostentatious mansion like Silver Moon. It was a massive, beautifully crafted lodge, built from heavy timber and river stone, designed to withstand the brutal winters of the territory. Plumes of wood smoke curled from massive stone chimneys, and the scent in the air was an intoxicating blend of pine resin, wood fire, and roasted meats. Standing on the sweeping wooden porch, framed by the falling snow, was Alpha Kalen. He wore a heavy wool sweater and dark denim, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He looked exactly as he had in the bookstore, imposing, quiet, and intensely observant. "Welcome to the North, little wolf," Kalen said, his deep voice carrying easily over the whistling wind. He walked down the wooden steps, his eyes dropping briefly to the prominent curve of her stomach before meeting her gaze. There was no pity in his expression, only a profound, grounded respect. "Thank you, Alpha Kalen," Luna said, her voice raspy from sleep and lingering fear. She clutched her coat tighter around her. "I know harboring me is an act of war against the Silver Moon. David's treaties are crumbling, and his borders are bleeding," Kalen replied evenly, gesturing for her to follow him inside. "He is in no position to wage war against the mountains. You are safe here, you and the pup." The next 2 months in the Northern Pines were a revelation to Luna. In David's pack, she had been an ornament, a political tool expected to smooth over his rough edges and look beautiful while doing it. Here, she was treated as an equal. The Northern wolves were harsh and pragmatic, but they valued wisdom above all else. When Kalen discovered her talent for logistics and agricultural planning, he quietly invited her to sit in on council meetings. She helped them optimize their winter food storage, mapping out trade routes through the treacherous mountain passes that the elders had overlooked. She found herself laughing during communal dinners in the great hall, her spirit slowly knitting itself back together. She was no longer a ghost. She was a mother, and she was a strategist. As the winter solstice approached, Luna's pregnancy reached its final, heavy weeks. The child was strong, its heartbeat a steady, reassuring drum in the quiet moments of the night. Kalen had provided her with a private, ground-floor cabin near the main lodge, ensuring she had peace while keeping her within the protective perimeter of his elite guards. It was a crisp, brilliantly clear afternoon. Luna was sitting on the porch of her cabin, wrapped in a thick fur blanket, watching the northern pups wrestle in the snowdrifts. Kalen approached, his boots crunching heavily in the packed snow. He didn't sit, instead leaning against the wooden railing, his jaw tight. "My scouts reported back from the southern pass," Kalen said quietly, not looking at her, keeping his eyes on the tree line. Luna's hand instinctively went to her stomach. The gentle warmth of the afternoon suddenly felt freezing. "He found us. He has been marching his personal guard up the valley for 3 days. Kalen confirmed, his silver eyes finally turning to her. They were hard, unyielding. "He is demanding an audience at the border river tomorrow at dawn. He invokes the ancient right of claim. He says I have stolen his mate." Luna looked down at her hands, the phantom weight of her platinum ring still a lingering ache on her finger. A tremor of residual fear spiked in her chest, but it was quickly swallowed by a fierce, maternal fire. She was not the same broken woman who had wept silently outside his study door. "Will you hand me over to avoid the bloodshed, Kalen?" she asked, her voice deadly calm. Kalen pushed off the railing, his towering frame casting a protective shadow over her. I told you, little wolf. A life debt is never forgotten. The North does not surrender its guests. But this is your ghost to face. If you wish to run deeper into the mountains, I will give you a head start. If you wish to stand, I will stand beside you. Luna looked out at the snow-covered peaks, drawing a slow, deep breath of the freezing air. She was tired of running. Tell him I will meet him at the river, Luna said, her chin lifting. It is time to end this. Dawn broke over the frozen cut, a massive glacial river that served as the border between the northern pines and the southern territories. The ice was thick, gleaming like polished obsidian under the pale, watery light of the winter sun. The air was so cold it burned the lungs, casting a hazy, ethereal fog over the icy expanse. On the southern bank stood David. He was entirely unrecognizable from the arrogant, polished alpha who had carelessly discarded his mate months ago. His dark hair was grown out and windblown, his designer coat replaced by heavy, utilitarian furs. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with dark, bruised exhaustion, and his posture was coiled with a desperate, fractured energy. Behind him stood a dozen of his best enforcers, shifting uncomfortably in the biting northern wind. Across the river, the tree line remained silent and still. Kaelin! David's roar tore through the quiet valley, his alpha aura exploding outward, cracking the thin layer of frost on the riverbanks. It was a sound of absolute, agonizing desperation. Bring her out. You have no right to hold what is mine. From the shadows of the ancient pines, Alpha Kaelin emerged. He walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, coming to a stop at the very edge of the northern bank. He did not bring an army. He brought only his imposing presence and an infuriatingly calm demeanor. I hold no prisoners here, David. Kaelin's deep voice carried effortlessly across the ice. Those who cross my borders do so by choice. Liar! David snarled, taking a step onto the frozen river, his boots slipping slightly on the slick surface. She is my mate. She is carrying my heir. Return her to me, or I will burn this forest to the ash. Kaelin didn't flinch. He simply stepped aside. From the snowy trees behind the Alpha, Luna walked forward. David froze. The breath physically left his lungs in a white plume of vapor. She wore a magnificent, tailored coat of dark wool, left unbuttoned to accommodate the massive, undeniable proof of her late-stage pregnancy. Her dark hair, once pinned perfectly into place for council meetings, flowed wildly over her shoulders. Her face was fuller, glowing with a fierce, terrifying vitality that he had never seen in all their years together. She did not look like a ghost. She looked like a queen. Luna, David gasped, the anger draining out of him in a single, devastating rush, leaving only a hollow, aching chasm. He took another step forward, his hand reaching out across the void. Luna, please, come home. I know everything now. I know what you are carrying. I was a fool. Luna stopped at the edge of the ice, staring across the river at the man who had shattered her heart. She felt the baby kick firmly against her ribs, a physical grounding in this surreal moment. You were not a fool, David, Luna said, her voice clear, cold, and carrying the authority of a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. You were exactly who you always were, a man who only values what benefits his ego. Celine meant nothing, he pleaded, his voice cracking horribly. The mighty Alpha of the silver moon was begging. I was blind. You are my mate. That is my child, my blood. Our pack needs its future. Luna's eyes narrowed, a brilliant, piercing gaze that pinned him to the ice. Your pack? She echoed, a bitter smile touching the corner of her mouth. You made your feelings perfectly clear, David. I was a political necessity, utterly empty, barren. She paused, letting his own cruel words echo in the freezing valley. This child does not belong to the silver moon. This child belongs to me. You cannot do this, David yelled, tears of absolute frustration and grief finally spilling hot over his freezing cheeks. I am its father. I command you to return. You command nothing, Luna replied, her tone dropping into a deadly, quiet register. She stepped right up to the invisible boundary line. You waited until I was useful again to decide I had value. But my worth was never tied to my womb, David. And it is certainly no longer tied to you. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the single item she had taken from the pack house besides her old clothes. The crisp, folded ultrasound paper. She let it fall from her fingers. The wind caught it, skittering the glossy paper across the ice until it stopped near David's boots. The treaties are broken. Your council has lost faith. You are a king of ashes, Luna said, her voice devoid of any lingering affection. As for me, the Luna problem is permanently solved. Without another word, Luna turned her back on him. She did not look over her shoulder as she walked back into the safety of the northern pines. Kaelin cast one final, pitying look at the broken Alpha on the ice before turning and following her into the shadows. David fell to his knees on the frozen river, his hands clutching the small, crinkled photo of his unborn child, his agonizing howl echoing endlessly against the silent, unyielding mountains. Spring arrived in the north, melting the heavy snows into rushing, life-giving rivers. Inside the warm, sunlit nursery of the pack house, Luna sat in a rocking chair, looking down at the sleeping infant in her arms. The baby boy possessed his mother's dark hair, but the fierce, bright spark in his eyes was entirely his own. She was surrounded by a community that respected her mind and protected her family. She had lost a kingdom built on lies, but she had forged a life built on truth and unyielding strength. The future belonged to them now. If you enjoyed Luna's journey of betrayal, strength, and ultimate triumph, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic, real-life romance stories. Let me know in the comments what you thought of David's downfall.